Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. This episode is brought to you by The Wellness Paradigm, a holistic health coaching company shifting the way that women understand and heal their bodies. Through bioenergetic testing, functional lab testing, and functional nutrition, we uncover what traditional approaches often overlook so you can stop guessing, start healing, and finally feel like yourself again. No more one size fits all protocols, just real answers, deep rooted healing, and the clarity and confidence you deserve to feel incredible. It's time to shift the paradigm of women's health. Now, on to our show. And hello, Ashley.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think this will be a really interesting conversation. Ashley blends so many unique tools for you guys, but she is a licensed psychotherapist, a menopause advocate, and a certified psychedelic therapist as well, and a longtime yoga teacher, right?
Yes, long time, 25 years teaching yoga.
So, just a little bit, just a few years here and there. So I'd love to hear, a little bit more on your story and how you started blending these worlds that might seem like they feel contradictory or maybe taboo. And I would love to hear how you got into it.
Yeah, well, I found yoga right after college. Shortly after I graduated, I was living in Los Angeles and I found yoga and it really changed my life. And it was healing me from the inside out. I had always been into fitness and I had had a pretty big, I guess, trauma, like core wound in college of rejection. And the one thing I figured out at that time was that if I worked out, if I got to the gym, if I was running around the track, I knew I would feel good and I would be good that day. So I somehow was connecting the mind body. And then I graduated from college, and one of my dear friends introduced me to yoga. And I just was an immediate yes. It just was, a natural fit. And so as I started practicing, it really was, as I said, healing me from the inside out and started to change my worldview, my personality. I don't think I realized at the time, but I probably was definitely depressed at that point. And it really started to lift my mood. And so shortly after I realized I wanted to start teaching, I started teaching yoga. And then once I was teaching, I saw the same thing with my students, people having emotional breakthroughs on the mat, really helping them through big life transitions. And I wanted to understand what was happening that we're on the mat for an hour and a half. And it's completely changing our lives and healing where other things were failing. And so I decided to go back to school, get my master's in psychology, become a licensed therapist. And during that, I wrote my master's thesis on the integration of yoga and modern mental health psychology, Western psychology, and understanding the role of somatic psychology, spiritual psychology, really a more integrative approach to health in general. It's not just mental health, they're all interrelated. These, I call them 5 layers of self. It's from the yogic tradition. We have a body, we have a mind, thoughts, we have emotions, emotional processes, we have an energetic body, which you work a lot with, the bioresonance, and then we have our spiritual nature. So we really need to address all 5 of those bodies. In yoga, they're called the koshas. And I believe that any healing modality we're doing, we want to be touching all of those. And a good way to look at it is every day. How am I touching or working with optimizing these 5 bodies? What's my physical fitness, my mental training, my emotional release work, my spiritual practice, and how am I taking care of my nervous system or my energy? So those are the 5 pillars of my work. And then at the same time, I found psychedelic medicine has always been a huge piece of my own journey. And, there's such a psychedelic renaissance happening. And so then I decided to get licensed or certified as a psychedelic therapist. And I'm also working with a biotech company now in their phase 3 FDA trials using psilocybin analog for major depressive disorder. So that's really thrilling. And in the meantime, went through menopause and most of my symptoms were mental health symptoms. And I realized as I started to educate myself in the menopause world, when the bottom kind of dropped out of my life, I realized that there was really a hole in the market and not a lot of people were talking about the deeper mental health challenges and the psychological phase of development that we're going through in midlife. And so I launched a menopause mentorship to really help women through that journey. So that's where I am now.
So interesting. I feel like I want to tap on this psilocybin bit a bit because it's unique, it's different, it's not talked about, and dare I say, taboo to talk about because, I have seen really beautiful, interesting studies about how incredible this can be, particularly for trauma, OCD,
Mhm.
PTSD, things like that. How do you navigate it not technically being a legal drug and also talking about it and, advertising it and how does that work and how do your clients receive it?
Well, technically, psilocybin is legal for therapeutic practices in Oregon, and Colorado has some, different legalities. But I've done my training with a company out of Boulder, and then we did our practicum in Oregon.
Mm.
And other than that, in the States, it is not legal to do. And obviously, there are a lot of underground practitioners who are doing incredible work. It's a really interesting space because, you know, psychedelics were really on the rise in the 60s, and then everything went underground. Psilocybin, MDMA, LSD were all categorized as, um, you know, illegal drugs. And so it pushed it all underground. And we had the war on drugs starting in the 70s and into the 80s. And they really were demonized, and most of the scientific trials stopped. And so our scientific research has really been stunted over the last 30, 40 years. And luckily, there have been some amazing advocates, MAPS, Rick Doblin, really working so long and hard to bring this conversation back to the FDA, that these compounds and natural, plant medicines can be so helpful for so many people. And in most of the scientific research, they're showing more promise than the pharmaceuticals that we're using right now. So one of the companies that I work with right now, called Cybin, their phase 2 FDA trial for major depressive disorder, they showed, now this is a psilocybin analog. So they've altered the psilocin molecule, and it's called deuterated the molecule to make it more stable, among other things. But they've shown that people 1 year out from only having, the protocol is two psychedelic immersions, so a 1 day long immersion. After two treatments, a year later, they're still not showing symptoms of depression. And not continuing any treatment. So not having to continue to ingest. Whereas with antidepressants, you have to be on them ongoing to continue to see benefit, and you're not really getting to the root of the source of the suffering. You're just sort of masking the symptoms. So psychedelics work to get to the root, I believe, spiritual, somatic, energetic, unwinding nervous system patterns, unwinding emotional patterns, unconscious, shadow, unconscious beliefs that we're holding, core wounds, and also how that is wired into our physical bodies, as well as offering some spiritual tools and existential, really felt experiences for people to have major shifts in their worldview, in their reality, to have a unitive experience, or what's called a transcendent experience, that can really shift and awaken a whole new perception of self and other and the world. So it's so exciting to see what's happening in the industry right now. It's definitely tricky because, again, there's such a big underground movement, and that entails both therapists who are working underground and doing psychedelic sessions, but also a lot of practitioners who are not therapists, and kind of goes both ways. There's a lot of therapists who are offering psychedelic journeys that haven't worked with psychedelics themselves, so they don't have personal experience with it. So there's some ethical questions about that, or how can they guide someone through if they don't even really know what the experience is. And then there's also, on the other side, a lot of people in the underground, other kinds of healing practitioners that are acting as psychedelic guides, but they're not trained therapists. So my concern with that, while I will say there are a lot of exceptional underground guides, several of my mentors, exceptional, exceptional. and can be even more healing than traditional therapy. So I just want to state that, because traditional Western talk therapy is not overly effective for most people. It's helpful. It can be helpful. I definitely believe in it, but I don't think that it's the only modality. And I think there's a lot of missing pieces in that traditional model. Anyway, so there are a lot of other psychedelic guides. And one of my concerns, because I see a lot of my colleagues, whether it's yoga teachers or acupuncturists or whoever, I'm a psychedelic guide now. But the problem with that is if they're not trained in trauma informed care or understand how to work with the unconscious, people can have psychotic breaks. There are they can have adverse events. And it's really important to understand how to mitigate that, how to reduce harm in psychedelic medicine, and how to understand trauma informed and culturally relevant care for people. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's quite the Wild West, but we're definitely in a phase of, increasing hopefully regulations and increasing availability and exposure. And so it's a really exciting time. The most exciting thing is that the science is really backing it up. The anecdotes that we've heard, and we know, those of us who've been using psychedelic medicine, we know how powerful it can be. We've seen it firsthand. So it's exciting to have the neuroscience backing it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious on, if somebody is going through, you mentioned middle life menopause, more depressive symptoms. I mean, this is a common one, and people don't want to talk about it because they want to just push through it and, just, oh, it's just menopause, right? But how do you, outside of, somebody is not open to taking a plant medicine journey, like how are you supporting them? And what are the biggest things that you see with, that clientele, like coming up?
Yeah, it's such a great question. A little bit of my story is I had my daughter at 46 years old, wonderful, IVF miracle baby. And we're working with the best world-class physicians on every level in Los Angeles. And no one at any point said to me, hey, you're 46, you're also in perimenopause, you're going to have this baby, you're going to breastfeed for a year or two. We need to really think about what's your plan and your support system to work with your hormones while you go through this postpartum journey, because you're going to be postpartum and perimenopause. So I've been coining the term postpartum perimenopause because there's so many women that are having children later in life that are also in the throes of perimenopause. And so when the bottom really dropped out of my hormones after I stopped breastfeeding, and I didn't realize for about a year how bad I was, even as a licensed psychotherapist, all my friends and colleagues in the wellness industry. Finally, one of my dear friends took me aside and was like, we have to get your hormones tested. Like, you don't need to be suffering. Because I was experiencing I did have physical symptoms, but the majority of my symptoms were mental health. Mm-hmm. Depression, anxiety, which I never really had before, either one. Lack of confidence, all of a sudden, loss of agency, loss of motivation, ambition, huge shifts in my identity, loss of sex drive, and that has major ripple effects into my relationship. So, and then depression just kind of all becomes this hamster wheel. And when I went to go study in the menopause space and start to understand, what's happening online, and it was just sort of the beginning of this massive breakthrough of the menopause movement and revolution, a lot of people were saying, oh, depression, anxiety are symptoms, but nobody was really getting under the hood of like, here's what this means. Like, this is a bigger conversation than just hormone therapy. There are a lot of stressors that we're experiencing at this phase of life. There are a lot of, I've really started to quantify this whole developmental phase in midlife, and we're dealing with our own internalized ageism, patriarchy, fear of aging, stressors from being in the sandwich generation of having young children, or maybe, empty nesting, which is a huge transition, caring for elder parents, career upheavals, and really, I don't like the term midlife crisis. I don't use that term. I really feel like this is a time of redefinition and re-identification for most people, men, women, all genders, at this midlife phase where we've had some successes, we've got to some places, we've built some things in our life, and now we're also reckoning with our humanity and our mortality. We've also probably lost people earlier than we would have liked. We've had great losses in our life. And we're also looking at longevity. We're on the down, the second half of our life, or maybe the last third of our life. And it's very confronting, and it brings up a lot of existential questions. And so what I found was, even though I got on hormones, which I'm a huge advocate for menopause hormone therapy, it's not for everyone. It's a nuanced conversation. It's extremely important to find your right healthcare team that is really supporting you and listening to you and advocating for you. If you don't have that, find a new practitioner. But I got on hormones. I love all three, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And what I found was it definitely stabilized me. It brought the bottom back. I had a basic, stabilization, and it didn't solve all my problems. And I realized, oh, I'm still dealing with, gray hair and wrinkles and shifts in my relationship, and my desire has totally shifted in my career. What drove me before is not that interesting to me. And that's created a whole shift in identity, and it's very challenging. So to start with, I would say, to answer your question, I really liked people to set out and think of it as a menopause hierarchy of needs. And we just tackle one thing at a time. It's sort of like, and again, I don't actually love this analogy. I'm working on finding a new one, but it is kind of like living with a chronic illness where you really have to shape your lifestyle around this new reality. Or it's like being pregnant, where all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore. I'm not going to do these things. I'm going to focus on these other things. So it is a huge shift in lifestyle. And it's a slow transition. And it's not just a 6-month journey. It's really a years long transition. And I like to put it in perspective for people to understand, because we have so little education around this. I mean, my generation had basically none, and other generations, younger generations are going to have a little more, which is great, hopefully a lot more. But we need to actually put it in the context of the whole of the feminine life cycle and menstruality. And so from the bookends of puberty and entering menstruality, your menstruating years, to the end of your menstruating years, menopause, both of those transitions are several years long. You go from a girl having a child's body and psyche to, over the course of 3-4 years, becoming a young woman, becoming a sensual, sexual being, connecting to the world in a totally different way. And their psyche completely changes as well, and their skills and their abilities, right? And the way that they engage with the world. And the same is true at the second threshold, which is pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum. Again, that's a years-long journey. That's not just 9 months. That's preconception, conception, gestation, being pregnant. That's at least 10 months. Then postpartum, they say really your body doesn't, and I'm going to include body mind. I don't like to separate body mind. Recover. And even that term recovery infers that we're going back to the same thing, and we're not. We're evolving into the next version of who we are. But that's a years-long journey. And the same is true with menopause. It's several years. And part of the natural cycle of that, both physical and psychological, is that we're in this metamorphosis. We're in a cocoon. We're really in an internal state that is one of decomposition, dissolving. Our old self is being deconstructed, remodeled. And we hear this all the time in the menopause space, like you're being remodeled hormonally, and estrogen affects every organ system of the body, which it does, but and also including our brain, including our psyche. But we're also being remodeled psychologically. Just if you can think of like the version of a 9-year-old girl versus a 15-year-old young woman, right? Totally different. And that's the same for us in this menopausal transition. And many of us, our desires change, the way we want our life to look changes, our values can shift, along with this massive physiological rewiring, which is going to require lifestyle shifts. We have to shift the way that we eat, the way that we move, the way that we're engaging with the world, our capacity might be reduced. Our nervous systems become much more sensitive. So, menopause hierarchy of needs, I start with sleep. We have to, hack your sleep, protect your sleep more than anything else. That is the primary foundation. Then fitness and nutrition, getting whatever hormonal plan you're going to work with. Once you get the fitness, nutrition, sleep, sort of the core pillars, and your hormonal work, if you're going to do hormones or not, other supplements, then you can start moving into the more subtle aspects of addressing, maybe it's sex, you're rewiring sensually, sexually in your relationship, shifts in your career, working through the shadow work of our own internalized ageism and resistance to aging, among many other things. So it's a big answer, but it's a longer process than I think most people think. And I just like to say, take it slow, one thing at a time. I've been at this for 3 years. And I feel like I'm just now sort of starting to get the hang of it because it takes a long time to make these lifestyle shifts.
Yeah, I think that's so intimidating for people because they want the quick fix, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
well, our culture is based on that. Our culture is very addicted to the quick fix, and that's actually part of my mission is to reshape culture. Because what it is recentering the feminine. And the feminine ebbs and flows. The feminine energy is yielding. She rests, she's magnetic, she's intuitive. Our culture is built to support masculine energy. We live in a patriarchal, capitalistic culture that's urgency based, hustle culture. And we are the ones that have to reshape that culture to support not just women and the feminine, but really all people, because our men or any gender also has yin and yang. And so it's not, patriarchy isn't just hurting women, it's hurting all people because it's not giving us permission to rest and permission to ebb and flow, permission to have a cycle where we're in a fallow phase, we're not productive, we're not outwardly productive, but we may be doing some really deep inner work for all people.
yeah, yeah, I like that, changing. That's a big ask or a big thing, I'm just going to change the way that we approach menopause as a society. But
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really for each one of us to be questioning and asking different questions and asking, and your body is the tool. Your body is the, divining rod. It is the barometer. Your body will tell you, nervous system will tell you, especially when you're in any phase of vulnerability, including the menopausal transition. You just, like I said, kind of like having a chronic condition where you have to adapt based on what your body or your psyche needs, right? And so if you don't, you're going to get the symptoms really clearly in your face and it's going to be speaking pretty loudly. And so in this way, we can use the sensitivity that comes online in menopause as a superpower to help us understand very quickly and reshape. And it takes discipline, and it's hard to change, at least in my experience. It's hard to change those habits, and they're not just habits of behavioral shifts but thinking.
oh, that's when I have my menopause clients. That's one of the hardest things because you've had a few more years to have everything really deeply ingrained in you.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's hard to shift that and be open to other modalities, techniques, things, I'm sure you see this a lot being in your practice, but a lot of people come into menopause thinking, I just need to be more disciplined with my movement and my food. That's the problem. And just go on HRT. And while there's probably an element of truth to potentially both of those things, it's so much deeper than that.
Hmm.
It's like deep nervous system patterns that have been rewired in you and just stuck in there for a long time, right? And I find sometimes my clients that are menopausal too, they're a little more stubborn. It's just a newer conversation. I
Hmm.
find that, this is being talked about and being more normalized, talking about nervous system and trauma and the word somatic, even things like, alternative medicines. This is newer and becoming very normalized for, this generation, but it is not for, a lot of clientele that it's, you know, I don't even love to use the word older, but that is just a reality, that are not
Hmm.
in in this different phase. Do you find that too?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think, that we're not just up against, as you said, like fitness, nutrition, and discipline. That is the patriarchal overlord, like over thought process that we just need to be more disciplined and we just need to fit into this box in order to get A to B to get that result. What we're really talking about is on a deeper level, women have been, first of all, we've been gaslit in our own symptoms and our own physiology and our own experience. So we've been really taught from the beginning to minimize all of our experiences and our symptoms. I really saw this when I had a belly birth. I don't like to use the term cesarean because it's named after Caesar. It's named after a man. Like so many of the lexicon is named after men. And so that's another place where we can really work to reshape the culture and center the female body's experience. Anyway, I went through a cesarean and and it wasn't an emergency. It ended up needing to happen, but it wasn't, like a crazy hurried emergency. It's actually, I advocated and said, this is what we need to do. This isn't happening. And so it was very traumatic. And I was sitting with all of this trauma, even being a trauma therapist and I was like, how come nobody's really talked about how traumatic this is? And none of my friends who've had my sister, cousins, all who've had cesareans, like nobody really like pulled back the curtain and was like, this is a hell of a recovery. And it's pretty traumatic to be, on an operating table awake while this is happening and all the things. That's an example of how much we minimize our experience and are taught to just, okay, just go for your 6-week checkup. And as long as that cut is healing, you're fine. It's like, what? That's absolutely crazy. And so the same thing is happening in menopause. We're going through massive shifts and also what's being revealed in this, because like, for example, again, myself, realizing how difficult I found it to advocate for myself, to take time off, to take a sabbatical from work, to ask my partner to chip in and do things that maybe he hadn't had to do before, to realize that I wasn't available for as much mothering I'm a great mother. I spend so much time with my daughter, but I really needed to take, extensive time to myself and do some healing. And what was revealed is my overfunctioning, like so many women, overfunctioning, self-abandonment, how all these years I've been just, I'm not going to bring that up because it's too confronting. I'm not going to, ask for that because that need probably won't even get met in the first place. I'm going to overfunction even in my work with my team and take on more than I should or need to be doing. All of these things that are surfacing, the shadow work that's surfacing for us. And so it's like we have the external lifestyle things that we need to address for our health. And then we also have and are unpacking some pretty big mental, emotional, psychological, and even spiritual habits and questions that are also really big. So it can be very overwhelming. The key is take it slow, rest, find mentors, find people that have been through it and that can guide you through it, and find community, find a support system. So I launched my menopause mentorship for this exact reason, because I was like, where do I go to get help? I mean, it's not just, yes, a physician, of course, and having your professional medical care team, but I really needed a support system. I needed sisterhood. I needed to just vent. And I needed guidance and mentorship, someone that could really help me along the way. And that's why I created Metamorphosis, which has been really thrilling inside of my membership. And my membership is all based on cyclical living and helping women have a full moon practice, a new moon practice. Then we align with the wheel of the year and really reinstalling rhythm and cyclical living, because part of the reason we're in such a mental health epidemic is because we don't allow cycles in our lives. And sometimes we're out and we're external and we're really flourishing. And sometimes we're inward and the tide is out. Maybe we're healing, maybe we're grieving, and we pathologize that. Like there's something wrong with it when it's just the natural flow of life. And so that's really what I'm passionate about helping to reinstall in our lives.
Now, if somebody wanted to connect with you, maybe they're interested a little bit more in what you're doing. You mentioned like mentors and things like that. Where can they learn more?
Yeah, all my links are in my Instagram. It is Ashley Turner, the number one, Ashley Turner, and the number one. And you can go there, and there's a link in the bio with, all different ways, whether you want to apply for therapy or psychedelic therapy or links to 2-week free trial for my membership. And ashleyturner.co is the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and, sharing your unique wisdom. And I hope this hits home with some of you listening. And, definitely feel free to share this with somebody that might need to also hear it. And otherwise, thank you for being here. Listeners, thank you for being here. And we'll catch you on the next show.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And thank you all so much for spending your time with us. I don't take that lightly. It's a huge investment. Thank you for having me.